Today's video is sponsored by Babbel. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world, teaching practical conversations to use in your day-to-day life. And since most everyone nowadays has trouble paying attention for longer than 30 seconds, Babbel offers short 5 to 10 minute interactive lessons so that attention disorder that you have won't be an issue. The lessons are designed by real language teachers, not some part-time employee who can't even say, Oye, buenos dias. ¿Cuándo vas a empezar a crear contenido divertido, chico de la informática? And it's not just lessons Babbel offers. They also come packed with podcasts, videos, and even games. Now, apart from the chance to learn a useful skill for life, Babbel has decided to sweeten the deal for all of my subscribers by giving all of you 60% off your subscription. So, after this video, click the link below for 60% off your subscription today.
They bound them, they tortured them, they assaulted them, and then they murdered them, and just destroyed our family.
It was a hot summer night in 1990 when Shane Craig kissed her sister goodbye and told her that she loved her. She had no way of knowing at the time that this warm farewell, one that they shared so often, would be something that she would reflect on for years to come. The devastating events that would occur in the short few hours following her departure would leave Shane and many others haunted, disgusted, and desperately seeking answers. It was August 21st, 1990 in Texas, when 22-year-old Cheryl Henry said her goodbyes to her sister Shane outside of a nightclub. Cheryl and her boyfriend, 21-year-old Andy Atkinson, had been enjoying a double date with Shane and her partner, and the couple were now ready for some alone time. The relationship was new and exciting, and the pair were completely smitten with one another. It was around 11 p.m. when the couples parted ways, with Cheryl and Andy headed for an undeveloped area near Briar Forest in West Houston, a secluded location that often served as a lover's lane for young couples. Cheryl would not return home from her date that night. Panic began to set in when her family discovered that she also hadn't shown up for work the next day. In fact, nobody had seen Cheryl since the night before, when she said her goodbye to her sister outside of the club. Her family was sick with worry and contacted police that morning to report her missing. Andy's grandmother, whom he lived with, also began to worry when he didn't arrive home. She called Andy's father, Garland, with her concerns, but he wasn't too distressed, initially believing there would be some rational explanation for his son's absence. I said, he had a date, he'll be 22 in 2 weeks, maybe they went somewhere together, you know? They are adults. However, Andy's family would soon receive a call from Cheryl's parents explaining that she had also not returned home, nor had she been in contact with anybody. It was at this point that the Atkinsons raised the alarm. Panic would grow for both families as they learned that Andy's car had been located. It was the evening of the 22nd when a security guard for a local business found the car parked at the secluded Lover's Lane area near the forest that they were going. The front seats were found reclined and the keys were in the ignition, though the engine had been switched off. Cheryl's shoes and purse sat in the passenger footwell, but there was no sign of her or Andy. The most concerning discovery made within the car was a splatter of blood, and it appeared fresh. An officer ran the vehicle's license plates and, upon discovering that the car belonged to a missing person, called in for a canine unit to search for the couple. It was shortly before midnight when authorities stumbled upon a gruesome discovery. Lying roughly 200 yards from the car, under a stack of rotting boards, was the body of 22-year-old Cheryl Henry. She was found face down and completely naked. Her clothing had been cut from her body and was discarded nearby. Her hands were bound behind her back with rope, and an autopsy would later conclude that she had been viciously raped before having her throat slashed repeatedly. Officers would discover a few bizarre things of note surrounding the scene of Cheryl's murder. Deflated balloons hung limply from a nearby tree branch, and a $20 bill lay near her body. The search for Andy was postponed until first light, when officers would eventually find his body as well. He was discovered tied to a tree about 50 yards from where Cheryl was found. He was still clothed and his hands had been bound behind his back, just like Cheryl's. Andy's throat had been cut so deeply that reports describe him as being nearly decapitated. The murders were brutal and horrific, and the crime only seemed to grow more savage as the details emerged. Police discovered a golf club and 3 golf balls, possibly belonging to Andy, in a field close by. The items had been arranged to form a crude arrow that pointed in the direction of Cheryl's body. Detectives would also reveal to Andy's father, Garland, that Cheryl had been killed first, which means he was tied to a tree and listened to her scream, listened to her being murdered, knowing that they were going to do the exact same thing to him, and he couldn't do anything about it. That's very hard to accept. Cheryl's mother, Barbara, was inconsolable and had to actually be physically restrained by police officers when she learned that the cadaver dogs had found her daughter. Garland would refuse to go to the morgue to identify his son, unable to bear seeing him in such a state. Though the search for the young couple had come to an abrupt and devastating end, the hunt for their killer was only just beginning. Police were quickly able to rule out robbery as a motive, since money was discovered both on Cheryl's body and in Andy's pocket, though the crime scene told them little else about the perpetrator. Nobody had witnessed anything suspicious in the area, and there was little physical evidence, save for a semen sample collected from Cheryl's body. Testing conducted at the time yielded no matches. Detectives questioned friends and family members and requested blood samples from those with close ties to the couple. Some of those working the case believed that the killer could have known both or at least one of the victims and followed them from the nightclub, including Houston Police Detective Darkus Shorten, who thinks that the use of a knife makes the crime seem more personal. Frustratingly, however, these avenues of investigation have led nowhere. The tips police received from the public also failed to produce any real leads. While progress began to stall in the case of Cheryl and Andy, their families tried to process their own grief. Andy's family chose to give him a closed casket service, with his father explaining, "I don't want to see anyone I love in a box. I will remember him as I saw him the last time that he was alive." And Cheryl's family feels the same way. The case grew stagnant and would remain so for over a decade, until a strange clue reignited police hopes for a breakthrough. In March of 2001, Houston's Homicide Division would receive a handwritten letter in which the anonymous sender claimed to have information on Cheryl and Andy's killer. The writer wanted $100,000 and instructed police to respond by placing an ad in the personal column of the Houston Chronicle to be published on the 12th of that month. The note also warned that the writer had hired a lawyer to ensure authorities played it straight. Investigators would comply with these instructions, compelling the sender or their supposed lawyer to call in, but nobody ever did. Police held back on publicizing the note initially, fearing that it would scare off the anonymous sender and potentially hamper their case. However, the contents of the note were eventually made public in 2004. Investigators still haven't determined whether or not that letter was a hoax, though they have said that it contains no identifiable prints nor any usable DNA. It wouldn't be until 2008 that a breakthrough would be made in the case. The DNA collected from Cheryl's body had been linked to an unsolved rape and burglary from 1990, a few months before the murders. The victim in that case worked as an exotic dancer at a club, not far from the one that Cheryl and Andy had visited on the night of their deaths. She had just returned to her boyfriend's apartment in Northwest Houston when she was attacked in the bedroom by a man holding a gun. He bound her hands behind her back and covered her mouth and eyes with duct tape before throwing her onto the bed. The victim recalled having a bag or pillowcase placed over her head and described how the man taunted her by placing the barrel of a gun to her throat, repeatedly cocking it and uncocking it. After sexually assaulting her, the attacker stole $250 from the home, disconnected her telephone, and fled. Despite 18 years passing since that brutal night, and the fact that the attacker had tried to conceal his identity by wearing a fishnet stocking over his head, the victim in that case was able to remember her attacker's face clearly, working with a sketch artist to create an image of her rapist and possibly Cheryl and Andy's killer. The woman was also able to describe what her attacker had been wearing: black gloves and a dark-colored shirt with matching pants. That may not seem like much, however, it has been theorized that that clothing resembles a security guard's uniform. Other exotic dancers at local clubs would allegedly come forward as victims after seeing that sketch, though the reporting on this is very scarce. Despite this breakthrough, police have been unable to track down the man in the sketch. Recent years have delivered few updates in the case, though it is not without promise. Detective Shorten announced in 2017 that they would be looking into familial DNA via genetic genealogy. This relatively recent advancement in forensics has proven crucial in identifying several suspects, including the man responsible for the murder of 2 teenagers in Montana in 1956. Patty Kalitsky was sexually assaulted before she and her boyfriend Dwayne Bogle were murdered on a lover's lane. That crime remained unsolved for over 65 years before the murder was linked via familial DNA. The families of both Cheryl and Andy remain hopeful that their killer will be identified using this method much sooner. Theories on this case remain divided, with each investigator maintaining their own suspicions. The lead detective at the time of the murders, Billy Belk, had stated, "Sometimes I think they were targeted. Cheryl was tied up more than Andy was, even though he was tied to a tree. Sometimes I wonder if there are 2 or even 3 suspects." Some have theorized that the killer, or killers, may have been targeting very specific victims. The women who were assaulted were returning home from a shift as an exotic dancer, and it had been reported that Cheryl had worked as an exotic dancer at some point prior to her murder, though this is unconfirmed. Andy was also said to have occasionally worked as a doorman at one such club, causing speculation that the perpetrator may have worked at or frequented strip clubs in the area. It has also been speculated that the same person may have been involved in the unsolved disappearance of Tara Breckenridge, a waitress from another club in Houston who vanished in 1992. Until a killer is identified, however, this link remains unproven. It has been 33 years since Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson were viciously murdered. And for me, it puts that date into an even deeper perspective. I was born less than a month after this crime occurred, and for my entire life, this case has remained unsolved. I personally cannot begin to imagine how that affects not only her family and people that have loved both Andy and Cheryl, but also the investigators on the case. Having a case go completely stagnant for 33 years, my entire life, is very hard to fathom. And while yes, 33 years is a very long time, the pain of their loss remains raw for the many loved ones of Cheryl and Andy's. In fact, Cheryl's mother Barbara still wears her daughter's ring and watch to this day, and often pictures her in heaven. But unfortunately, she remains haunted by the circumstances of her daughter's death. To think her last moments were of terror, and I wasn't there. Because mothers, that's their job, to make it better. Andy's father Garland believes that the murder was committed by more than one person, or perhaps somebody with ties to his past. Garland spent some time in the late 80s imprisoned on drug charges, and although police have never found any kind of connection there, he still feels Andy's loss deeply. We were not only father and son, but best friends as well. You see things on TV, you read things in the paper, but you never imagine that something that drastic, that horrifying, could be happening to someone you love.
It's been 31 years since Ronnie, Doreen, Ryan, and Russell Jack vanished without a trace in Prince George, BC in 1989.
Whoever knows something or know where they are, they can come forward and just please let us bring our family home. So I don't care about the justice part of it. Justice is not in the picture anymore. It's about bringing my family home.
Cases where multiple people go missing together and are never found usually gather a decent amount of media attention and public speculation because of just how uncommon and perplexing they are. This, however, doesn't seem to have been the case for the family of 4 who went missing on August 2nd, 1989, from Prince George, British Columbia, in Canada. Widely unreported, the family of the young adults who went missing with their children still fight to get attention to their case. The Jack family was comprised of Ronald Ronnie Paul Jack, born March 29, 1963, Doreen Ann Jack, born April 24, 1963, and their 2 children, Russell, aged 9, and Ryan, aged 4. Both Ronnie and Doreen grew up in the Cheslada Reserve just outside of Burns Lake, a rural village in the northwestern central interior of British Columbia. Maria Jack, Doreen's younger sister, has described it as a place where everybody knows everybody, something that I can relate to from the town that I grew up in. She said of growing up in the area, it was a community where, to travel, we used horse and wagon. Our grandparents had 4 Clydesdale horses and they were beautiful. When we needed to get water, we had to go from the grassy plains all the way down to the south bank, fill up our canisters with water, and then bring it back up. Ronnie was reportedly from a big family, being one of 6 brothers. He was described as being extremely nice, extroverted, and passionate, but was a somewhat intense and complicated person. He was incredibly close to his mom even after moving out, and Doreen's sister Maria has stated when Doreen was going through tough times, Ronnie was there to help her by supporting her financially as well as encouraging her to take educational courses and driving lessons so she could have her independence. Despite this, she stated that Ronnie could get out of control, even going as far as saying that she witnessed him hitting Doreen on more than one occasion. Doreen's tumultuous upbringing was marked by violence, poverty, and sexual abuse at the hands of her father's friends. Her 2 sisters, of which she was the oldest, Maria and Lorraine, also went through the exact same situation. All 3 of them had been abandoned by their mother at a young age, so they grew up with their father, who couldn't cope with his wife's absence and struggled heavily with alcohol, which led him to, at his worst, drunkenly shot at the girls as a way of telling them off, before passing out and locking them outside to sleep in the cold. With all of the hurt and trauma, Doreen grew up to be incredibly resilient. Marlene states that she was both easy to be around but also surprisingly stoic when it was required of her, while simultaneously being rebellious. Despite sometimes abusing alcohol and other substances, even Ronnie's mom would say that Doreen was hardworking, quiet, polite, and didn't cause any trouble. All 3 sisters were forced into a residential school where all of them reported being abused physically and verbally by the nuns. For these reasons, both Lorraine and Maria admit the 3 were never able to truly become close as sisters. Apparently, Russell wasn't even Ronnie's biological son. While in college at the age of 17, Doreen had been raped by a student. Doreen never went to the police about this because, to quote her sister Maria, "In a racist town, how can you?" So, in February of 1980, Russell was born. 5 years later, on July 26, 1985, baby Ryan was born. Ronnie's cousin had stated that the couple were happy and that Ronnie treated Russell as his own and wanted to work and make a living for his children. However, cracks were beginning to show in their relationship by the year that they disappeared. Doreen would sometimes drink heavily, as her demons were catching up to her while staying home with the children full time, and Ronnie's temper had become explosive. Yet still, he was working full time doing odd jobs. They had been living on welfare due to a back injury that Ronnie had suffered while working at a sawmill, which left him unable to work after. The Jack family had been living in their home for approximately a year before their disappearance, and Ronnie was desperate to work. One cousin reported seeing Doreen stealing cough medicine for the boys, and a few months before the tragic disappearance, Ronnie told his mother that he owed someone some money, but she couldn't get it to him before he disappeared. They were undoubtedly down on their luck, so on the night of Tuesday, August 1st, 1989, Ronnie decided to go down to the local bar to have a few drinks and unwind. Ronnie was at the First Leader Pub, described by numerous sources as a sketchy drinking hole that wasn't far from his home, reportedly only 4 blocks away. While he was there, however, he thought he had struck gold for his family. It's unknown who or how the conversation started, but Ronnie got an offer, a really good offer. A man, described as being in his late 30s, offered Ronnie and his wife Doreen temporary jobs at a logging camp, thought to be around 40 kilometers west of Prince George. The pay was reportedly high, and they would be there for between 10 days and 2 weeks, possibly longer. This is the break that they so desperately needed. Ronnie would be in charge of cutting down de-limbed trees into logs, and Doreen would be a cook's helper in the camp's kitchen. Soon after the arrangements were made and the plan was in motion, Ronnie had just 2 phone calls to make. One call was to his parents' home. He spoke to his mother, Mabel, and relayed all of the information to her, and told her that they'd be back well before Russell started school that September. He sounded hopeful and excited, and knowing how badly they needed this, his mother didn't discourage him, even though the offer seemed too good to be true. But something was said at the end of that particular call that has never left her mind. Her son said something to the effect of, "If I don't come back, come looking for me." Since so much time has passed, the exact quote has changed a few times. From, "We'll be back in 8 days, Mom, don't worry about us. But if I don't come back, look for me." To, "Mom, if I don't come back, come looking for me at the house." And even, "If I don't come back, you look for me between Vanderhoof and Lucas Lake." Whatever the exact words were, the sentiment was the same. He didn't sound nervous or afraid. The call then quickly ended. The other call was about Russell and Ryan, although some accounts differ on how the following subject came about. But here is what we know for sure. The children were brought up in conversation. Apparently the offer was just for the couple, as Ronnie ended up calling his brother at 11:16 p.m. and asked him to look after the kids, but he refused. The man from the bar then suggested bringing the kids along, as they had a specific place at the camp for them, a daycare. It was now the dead of night, and witnesses would report seeing Ronnie and the unknown man leaving the pub together, and since the Jacks didn't have a car, the man had offered to drive them to the job site that same night. According to the RCMP investigators, the man accompanied Ronnie back to his residence and waited while the family packed. Doreen's cousin, according to multiple sources, including the RCMP's constable Judy Thomas, who at one point was a lead investigator on the case, claims to have been at the property at midnight and is the only person who saw the unknown man, and was able to later describe him to investigators. He is also the only person to have seen the family leave with the unknown man after Ronnie's call to his parents. Yet, in a later article from February of 2000, a lead investigator would claim that the previous description of the unknown man turned out to be unreliable because it was based on sketchy information from a cousin. The alleged miscommunication described led to the RCMP to not pursue a proper investigation until several months later, with one source reporting that they may have only taken the description and sketches of the man in December of 1989. Constable Judy Thomas would later admit that she did not actually know where those sketches had come from, telling one family member that they were just simply in the case file. The clock reads 1:21 a.m., the early hours of August 2nd, 1989, and all 4 members of the Jack family were seen leaving their home at 2116 Strathcona Avenue and piling into a man's 4-wheel drive, dark-colored pickup truck. And that's it. 4 people, including 2 children, have been gone, just like that, for more than 30 years. Ronnie had stated that the family would be gone for a while, so they weren't reported missing right away, costing the investigation valuable time. An official report was filed on August 25, 1989. According to Mabel, the police went to the home where they searched the property and took pictures, noting that the family left the majority of their furniture and clothes behind. You'd think that a family of 4 going missing after leaving with a man for a new job would create a media frenzy, but this wasn't the case. Most people attribute this to the fact that the family was indigenous, as the RCMP is notorious for under-investigating crimes or disappearances where the victims were of indigenous descent. Only one paper picked up the story, the Prince George Citizen, on Wednesday, August 30th. And even here, they did the family wrong by stating in the headline, "Burns Lake family missing," when the family was from Prince George. The Prince George Citizen then reported the family, stating that they were safe on September 7th, 1989. This never happened. In fact, at the time, Mabel moved into the Jacks family home so she could use it as a sort of home base so she could make further searches in the bush alongside her husband and their sons. A few months later, the family contacted the RCMP for an update on the case. This is where they found out that the case had been closed because the RCMP were under the impression that the family had been found but couldn't give any details on how they got to this conclusion, and the investigation was quickly reopened. In February of 1990, the Prince George RCMP teamed up with Crime Stoppers to create a missing persons poster of all 4 family members, and a $2,000 reward was offered for any information leading to the whereabouts of the Jack family. In the fall of 1990 and the spring of 1991, Crime Stoppers created a reenactment video which ran for 3 weeks on TV, but unfortunately, no leads had emerged. The first solid clue came but 7 years later. It was an early Sunday morning on January 28, 1996. The clock struck 8:33 in the morning, and a call comes in to the Vanderhoof police with a brief but striking 10-second message.
The Jack family are buried in the south end of the ranch.
The dispatch had no time to ask any questions before the call ended. And unfortunately, experts were unable to decipher the location of the ranch from the tape provided. Investigators attempted to lure the caller back by publishing several appeals in local newspapers asking them to call again, but no one ever did. A few months later in March, the voice recording was analyzed by the University of British Columbia, but what they found doesn't seem to have been made public. What we do know, however, is that the police were eventually able to trace a call to a house in Vanderhoof where, at the time of the call, a party had been going on. There were between 6 and 9 people at that party, but investigators were unable to locate all of the partygoers. With media attention and pressure brought on by the efforts of the family members, the RCMP have conducted hundreds of interviews, obtained thousands of documents related to the case, and combed through numerous properties in search of the 4 missing family members. Yet still, to this day, no trace of the Jack family has ever been found. The unknown man that offered them the job was described as a Caucasian male between 6 foot and 6 foot 6 inches tall with reddish brown hair, a short, full beard and mustache. His hair went to the bottom of his ears and it was parted on one side, and at the time appeared to be in his late 30s and approximately 200 to 275 pounds. He was wearing a baseball cap, a red checkered work shirt, faded blue jeans, a waist-length blue nylon jacket, and work boots with leather fringes over the toes. This man, still to this day, has never been identified. There are a number of different possibilities as to the fate of the 4 family members, some believable and some very outlandish, and I am not going to insult the family and loved ones by theorizing ridiculous avenues such as ghosts or aliens being responsible, but there are 3 to me that stand out. The first is that both Ronnie and Doreen were the targets. The first theory dictates that both adults were the targets of the disappearance. The man is honest in his quest to find workers, but his operation was either illegal or lacked the proper permits. The Workers' Compensation Board of British Columbia, operating as WorkSafe BC, existed back then but didn't operate the way they do now, and Indigenous people speaking out on unsafe work conditions was often overlooked. They could have been hired for an operation where they got severely injured or even killed and have gone unreported. This wouldn't explain where the children went, however, or how no one else seems to have been hired from any nearby towns to that location. The second theory is that only one of them was the target. Ronnie reportedly owed money to someone as he asked his mother for help to pay off the debt. He never gave any specifics on what this debt entailed, which leaves room for a lot of speculation. The man could have made up a position for Doreen to take the deal to seem more appealing so as to not make Ronnie suspicious. If Doreen was the target, even though she is reported as keeping to herself and not causing trouble, they could have taken Ronnie for the same purpose. Less suspicion and more exciting for the family. A study focused on 4 sites in the continental United States and Canada revealed that up to 40% of sex trafficking survivors were either Native American or First Nation women. Yet, those same women make up less than 10% of the overall population at each of those sites, showing the disproportionately high human trafficking impact on Native Americans and First Nation. The third theory is the first theory that police ran with because it was honestly the most obvious. It was a car accident. The family and the man were involved in a vehicle accident and were hidden in a dense bush off the side of the road. Police seem to have dropped this theory after the area was thoroughly searched. Aside from not ruling it out through searching, there's another indicator that this was likely not the case. If the unidentified man who offered them the job was in the crash, he would have been reportedly missing by his family, or at the very least, his employer. But no reports ever came in. If he managed to survive, then there's a gray area, where he could have easily killed the rest if any survived to avoid jail time. This would fit for both the unknown man and his truck to still be missing. Ronnie's mother Mabel faced yet again another missing persons case in her household in September of 2005. Her husband, Casimel Thomas Jack, Ronnie's father, went missing at the age of 70 when he left early in the morning for a hunting trip. Local volunteers, search and rescue, family members, and the RCMP searched for him to no avail. Years later, someone came up to her with Casimel's prize knife and said that he'd given it to them, which she doesn't believe. His case only appears on one website which recorded him as an abduction case. And tragically, nearly 20 years later, he's still missing. Casimel Thomas Jack stands at 5'10", weighing 160 pounds, with gray-brown hair. He was wearing glasses with a gold frame, a red ball cap, green jacket, blue jeans, leather lace-up boots, and leather gloves. In 2017, Marlene Jack, Doreen's sister, testified about her sister's disappearance at a hearing that was part of the Canadian inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. In her testimony, she revealed that during the investigation, she was threatened by authorities that if she spoke to the media about the case, they'd stop giving her any updates on it. There will always be a ton of speculation, especially online, as to the fate of this family. One person doesn't just vanish into thin air, let alone 4. This year marks the 35th anniversary of the disappearance of Ronnie, Doreen, Russell, and Ryan. No trace of them has ever been found. Their families fight tirelessly to keep their names floating in the media in the hopes that someday their prayers for justice will be answered.